Hey guys, it's your girl Abby and I'm back with another video. I think in society we have such a different view on our ego and our pride, and a lot of us sometimes even think that our pride and our ego is something to be proud of, right? No pun intended. I want to discuss kind of the negative aspect of ego, the negative aspect of pride, and how it can actually take hold of all areas of our life. Think of our psyche, which is our mind, and it is made up of three major parts, right? We've got our id, we've got our ego, and we've got our super ego. Our id is kind of like that subconscious. It's kind of like, for lack of better words, it's kind of like the evil that's within us all, right? Our id is the thoughts that we think, the bad thoughts that we have, or the negative thoughts, or the kind of scary thoughts that we have but don't necessarily act on, or at least we try not to act on them, right? And so that is our subconscious, that is our id. And then we have our super ego, which is on the other side of that spectrum. So I relate super with morality, right? And so our super ego is related to our morality, right? Our high standard that we hold ourselves to, what we aspire to be, right? The good and great that is within us. We also have our ego, and our ego is kind of in the middle of our id and our super ego, right? And so its purpose is to kind of filter between the id and the ego and kind of create a narrative about who we are. And so the way that I think of our ego, or the way that I remember what it is and the purpose that it serves, is it's the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. So it isn't totally immersed in our id and our subconscious, and it isn't totally immersed in our super ego, which is this high and mighty, right? Because we can't fully live in our high and mighty, and we can't fully live in our, deepest, darkest desires. And so we've kind of got to find a sweet spot in the middle, which is our ego. Sometimes our ego can be out of balance, right? And that's where we get to a place of arrogance. That's where we get to a place of pride. Kind of when people are over-identifying with a character, right? So I see a lot of people with kind of like a gothic aesthetic, a kind of like even an example of that would be like The Weeknd, right? The artist The Weeknd, where he started off making music and creating from a dark space, right? Like a lot of his music, a lot of his lyrics is very much so dark, right? And that comes from over-identifying with our desires, over-identifying with the things that bring us pleasure, right? Yes, you can have a dark side to you, but it isn't all that you are. And yes, you can have a light side to you. You can be a light in this world, but you aren't fully light. That isn't all that you are. You are not a god, you know what I mean? So on both ends, it can kind of be, on both ends, it can be taken out of balance. I was having a conversation with one of my close friends, and she was saying, hey, but isn't having like an overinflamed ego, isn't having a sense of pride what's going to get you to get things done? When you work from a place of arrogance, you work to please yourself, and you work to please your own understanding. And I know that sounds kind of confusing, but if you are your own moral guidance, then you are going to essentially, now this is making sense, essentially you are going to work to fill your desires, and your desires come from two places, your id and your super ego. And so if you use your super ego, if you use your pride and your arrogance as your motivation, where are you going? What is guiding you? Right? Because as humans, our desires are not always good. And so you're left at a whim where you can be led by anything, right? You can be led by any desire. How do you know if the desire is going to produce something good? How do you know if the desire in its essence is good? Is it coming from my id? Is it coming from my super ego, right? And so I think that's where pride can really mislead us. And another thing that I was reading that really just stood out in my mind was the story of David and Goliath, right? And for those of you that don't know the story of David and Goliath, David was a young boy a young shepherd boy. And so he'd be on the fields, and as he was shepherding the sheep, he would face lions and bears, and to protect his sheep, because that was his job, to protect his sheep, he would have to fight them. And through the years of being a shepherd, he learned and gained the strength to fight the bears and the lions. But it was interesting how David kind of told the story of that, right? Because he referred to his ability to fight the lions and fight the bears as God giving him the strength to do so. And so he didn't attribute his success to himself. He's attributing his strength to something beyond him. And I think when we attribute our strength to something beyond us, we can then allow great things to happen. Right? When everything is focused on ourselves, it doesn't allow for that kind of space of magic to happen. You know what I mean? It doesn't allow for a level of faith to develop. And I think for anything magical, anything great, anything that is beyond us to happen, we have to have a level of faith that is beyond us. And the way that a level of faith that is beyond us is developed is through a sense of humility. And the only way that we can be in a state of humility is attributing our strength to something greater than us. Human beings, we're never meant to be in isolation. We were never meant to be and live our lives on our own. And so I think when we separate ourselves, we actually do ourselves a huge disservice in that we are no longer able to see who we really are. And I'm going to talk about this in the realm of self-development or self-growth, right? I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, you are dedicated to being the best version of yourself. You're dedicated to growing, and not necessarily growing in the direction of success, but growing in a way where you want to be the best that you can, right? And you want to make your life the best that you can. And so we're going to be talking about it in that sense. And so pride doesn't necessarily allow you to do that, because pride is blinding. Pride doesn't allow you to see those things about you that are maybe not so productive, that maybe need to be worked out of you, right? Because when you have a sense of pride and you have a sense of arrogance, you put everything on you, right? I am this, I am that, I am that. Or on the opposite side of that, you have a list of who you are and all these negative things, right? When you're more so in the id side, right? I am not worthy, I am not capable, I'm not smart, I'm not this, right? And so our pride or lack thereof can manifest into different ways. And so I think really having death of pride is what we need to be focusing on, so that we can see ourselves clearly, so we can see who we really are. And from there we can start to filter, right? From there we can start to work out, okay, you know what, I'm actually very judgmental, you know. And this is for me personally, what I've had to realize about myself is, you know what, actually I'm very judgmental. My pride tells me that I'm not judgmental, I just know what it is. I just see things clearly. My pride tells me that. But when I remove my pride and I look at myself for face value, no, I look at other people and I judge them by how they look and how they dress and how they speak, and that is not fair, right? And I think when we really get a good look at ourselves, right, we can see the areas that we need to work on. We can see where there's room for improvement. And I think a lot of us sometimes maybe are afraid to do that. It is very scary to see your naked self, you know. Some things are not so pretty. Some things are not so aesthetic, right? And so it really requires a level of bravery to be like, hey, I'm devoted to living my best life, right? And not living my best life in the sense that we think it's just enjoyment, but living a life that is purposeful and living a life that has meaning. And the only way that we find that is by living a life based on faith that is greater than us. And that's a whole different topic that we can maybe get into another day, because that's so deep rooted. But essentially you get the vibe, like you get the gist. It's to live a life in service, right? In service to something that is greater than you, in service to a greater good, right? I think that's how I try and lead my life, is like life gets really meaningless and really lackluster and really boring when there is no meaning, right? When we're just here to float around, it gets very meaningless and it gets very draining. And I think that's where we start to fall into, you know, certain vices and certain things, because there's nothing that we're working towards. And so these are all things that we can kind of use to help guide us in the direction of leading a life that is purposeful and leading a life that is purposeful towards a greater good, right? Anyways, if you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up. Definitely let me know if you like these topics where we get really intricate into like the psychology and the mind and, you know, the heart, right? These are things that I am kind of a nerd about and I love to talk about. So if that's something that you guys are interested, we could definitely talk about it more on this channel. But without further ado, that is it for my video. I will see you guys in another one, and I just want to thank you so much for being here. If you've made it this far in the video, like honestly, you have no idea how grateful I am for that. And so anyways, before I ramble on, definitely follow me on my other socials, ABIGXRL on Instagram and on TikTok, and I will see you guys in another video. Have an amazing day or have an amazing evening. I will see you next time. Goodbye, peace and love. Until next time.